Welcome back to Scholar's Bog, Scholar's Swamp. We want to be fancy, call it a wetland complex. It's a swamp. Today's question, what is the digital? More to the point, what do we mean by digital experience? What does it mean to live in the world today? If you look closely, you'll see some turtles, 5 or 6 of them on a log over there. So what is the digital? Usually we think the internet, we think social media, we think fast computers, but when we ask what do these things mean to our existence, what do these things mean to our life world, how we live, our values, our politics, our ethics, then it gets a little more complicated, a lot more complicated, because what the digital means for, as an example, a sense of accountability or responsibility when you're on the anonymous web, that's quite a bit different than it used to be. From the very start, my bias is this. My bias says that if we take one disciplinary perspective, say a scientist, a natural scientist, empiricist perspective, or a sociologist or psychologist perspective, then we limit the question far, far too much. We need to take an interdisciplinary perspective. So here's an example. If I was to say, living in the digital era today is smart devices, whether you have the Amazon or the Google, whatever smart device you may or may not have. Okay, that's partially true, but that speaks to the physical box or physical thing. An empiricist would like that. An empiricist is someone who claims that genuine knowledge or reliable knowledge comes through your senses. It's what you can see, taste, touch, smell, and so on. So it's that scientific, and that's wonderful, but that's too reductionistic. That's too narrow. What we need to think about, again, my own bias, to answer what is the digital is a broad perspective. This is admittedly a generalized concept, an overly general way of speaking about human life experiences, because your experiences of the digital may be quite a bit different than mine. For instance, I'm very rarely on any kind of social media. That just doesn't interest me at all, but I'm very interested in the technology side. I love new computers, doing cool video games with my boys, things like that. So we will have different experiences, but I will try and be as specific as I can. So to start, again, in that general worldview perspective, the digital had a set of promises, and it subsequently had a number of doomsday predictions associated with it. The digital promised us more leisure time because computers could take over the jobs that we didn't want to do. It could do repetitive tasks and calculations. It could make life better. So we would have more free time, but we would have more free time without losing our jobs. Because after all, who would buy a personal home computer or a computer for their business knowing that it was going to put people out of work? Well, surprise, surprise. Apparently a lot of people would do that. Still, the promise was more leisure time, more disposable income, largely simply a happier, healthy life. Technology was going to save us all. Technology could save us from pollution. Technology could save us from wars, hunger, disease. I'm still holding out on a number of those promises and hoping they'll come true. So far, a lot of them are questionable. The big one is that the digital has become a promise for freedom over our own lives. The freedom to gain knowledge and truth and insight that's freely available online, that will give us the ability to make better democratic choices, better healthcare medicine choices. It will give us the opportunity to financial decisions, of course. In other words, the digital promised freedom in almost every aspect. Has that happened? Or are we seeing more and more people enslaved to conspiracy theories, weird echo chambers in which they only hear certain versions of reality that they can't seem to get out of? And again, I'm generalizing because your experiences and my experiences and their experiences will be much different, but still, are we more free because of the internet? Are we more free because our cell phones have better cameras and they have faster processors? Are we more free now that we can get knowledge at any time at the tip of our fingers, but we're still not sure how to digest it because the digital can't think for us? And when it does, well, then we're not free, are we? For all the promises, we see the immediate doomsday predictions as recently as the Mitchells versus the Machines, a children's cartoon that came out not that long ago on Netflix that deals with this idea of AI taking over, AI being tired of humans. And we've seen this story play out in the media time and time again. It's a theme apparently that just doesn't get old. We're enthralled by the idea of the doomsday, what could go bad. And yet, simultaneously, I suspect, we uphold the promises more than the doomsday, else we would all be burning our computers. The point is that for the promises in the doomsday, there's very good practical reason for thinking about the digital. Very good practical reason. We're on the verge of a Web 3.0 world. Web 1.0 was your very basic, you go to get information, there's no interaction of any kind web. Web 2.0 had some predictability in it. It had some interaction. Users could upload content, especially on YouTube, social media, where people could interact in some way with machines in part, but largely with other people. Wonderful. Web 3.0 offers true AI, where another person and the computer virtually become indistinguishable. My children rely quite a bit on Amazon's smart device, the name I won't say in case you have one. And they spend a lot of time asking questions, interacting, but it's still so awkward. They're all pre-recorded responses. There's no living dynamic. There's no dialogue. There's no conversation of any kind. So it's still quite Web 2.0. Web 3.0 terrifies a lot of us because thinking machines, well, you've seen the movies. You know what I'm talking about. So imagine we get to Web 3.0. What will that mean? Elon Musk is somewhat terrified of the singularity that might happen, that moment where AI develops AI, a consciousness of its own. I'm not sure that we need to worry about that right now. What we need to worry about is people online hacking global. Ireland just lost its, for a full day, I believe, or two. It was shut down because of hackers. Their health system was shut down because of hackers. In the US, a week ago, its gas line, a major gas line going all across southern states, was shut down by hackers with ransomware. So yes, we should definitely worry about AI and a singularity being able to accomplish that kind of terrible doomsday thing. But we should also worry about other people. But that's part of this interconnectedness of all things with the web. We live in a world contingent or dependent upon the digital. You know that. There's nothing new there. What is new is thinking a little bit more about religion in the digital. If we get a 3.0 web, a singularity, artificial intelligence, this thinking creature that's digital, binary code, ones and zeros, it knows all things. It controls most or all things electronically. In so many ways, it becomes very much like the monotheistic conception of the divine, an all-knowing, all-powerful deity, smarter, faster, more capable than we are. So the future of digital technology is very much a future of the digital divine. Whether that is actually divine, supernatural, or not, it has many of the characteristics of a traditional titan, god, divinity, demi-something. So I'm not that old. From your perspective, I might be ancient, but I'm not that old. But I was there from the beginning, for the beginning of the internet. I was there for the beginning of personal computers. Here's a picture, Battlestar Galactica. I was maybe 1 or 2 at the time. I wasn't consciousness of the world. And this is an example of future technology at the time. Look at the computer, the screen, the tiny little screen, the huge box behind it. There's no peripherals, there's just a keyboard. And its centerpiece for this show. This is a show about science fiction, the future of space exploration, all these wonderful things. And that computer just looks like if you turn it on, it would give you instant radiation poisoning. Here's a picture of my first laptop. It's an approximation. Mine looks a little different than this. Actually, it was my family's laptop. I could never have afforded this. My family had to buy this laptop. And it did nothing. I'm not even sure why we got it. I think even then there was a certain hysteria around having to have these technological devices. It had no hard drive on it. It had a hard disk, so it's still kind of squishy. It wasn't one of the 5-inch discs. It was a 3 1/4. And you'd slide it in and it would load up the DOS, disk operating system, made Bill Gates famous and rich. And then you could try and figure out maybe some basic typing, I don't even think we had a modem at that time. I think you could upgrade to a basic thing, but there was no point. There was nothing on the web. There was no Netscape. There was no Yahoo. There certainly wasn't a Google at that time. But it was cool to have one of these things that you plugged into the wall. I don't even think it had a battery. The screen was yay big and green. That's it. Text, that's all. Okay, cool. We have to start somewhere. But I often wonder, why did we even do that? Again, I think there was a digital enthusiasm from the beginning that believed that having these products would be exciting, but also deliver a certain kind of promise of a better life. This is my laptop today. It does a silly amount of computations in a fraction of a second. It does all kinds of crazy things. It's battery powered. It's, easy 1080p video. That's old school. Now everybody's into 4K video. So the technology has obviously developed quite a bit. Has my life improved from laptop 1.0 to laptop 2.0? As I reflect on it, there are many things that have changed and improved. Leisure time, entertainment, playing video games with my boys on PS4, PS5, whatever. These things have improved. But are people happier? Are people healthier? Are we more compassionate? Do we have more secure incomes? And so on and so on. And when I shadow those questions behind these two laptops, I'm not seeing a huge difference. But again, that's my life. One of the big changes in laptops is that the first one was created to be isolated. It wasn't created to be online. And the second one doesn't even have a traditional hard drive. It's a solid state drive, but it has no CD drive. It has no place for a disk to be put in the side. It's designed to be a hybrid, integrated into the internet, online all the time, whether that's through local, I can put it through my cell phone, I can put it through a local Wi-Fi network. This device exists with one foot in the virtual and one foot in the real. That's one of the leading differences now between my 1980s product and the current. So we've arrived at a very interesting word, virtual. And I think this is the big thing to be thinking about when we try to answer what does it mean to be digital. For me, virtual means online gaming, largely. Yes, social media, yes, it's browsing the web for information, but to truly get that immersive, like deeply immersive, your whole kind of sense of being is immersed in the digital, video games are the best way to do that. It doesn't matter if you're playing Fortnite or something else. When COVID started, my boys and I began playing a new game that we'd never played before called Subnautica. Here's a trailer for Subnautica. I'll play it while I'm talking. It is amazing to watch this video game and to be you are genuinely immersed in this thing. And when a Leviathan, a creature from the deep, comes up and bites the submarine, you jump. And when a nuke goes off and blows up a ship, you jump. It gets your attention. It feels real, even though you know it's a cartoon. The textures of the water, the fish inside feel real. So 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we have virtual goggles and we're fully immersed, that to me is going to be exciting. But if you've seen the movie Ready Player One, which I seem to reference a lot for this course, Ready Player One, that future could be also very dark and dangerous, depending on who owns those realities or that reality. Those geese are excited about the virtual. By contrast to current virtuality, virtual games and whatnot, here's the previous game from my previous laptop era. This is Lode Runner. This was it. This was the height of technology. Notice the deep story. There's no storyline. Notice the deep text. Okay, there's no graphics. It's just terribly, terribly basic. But it was the beginning of a promise for access to a new world that technology is delivering on. So the question becomes, so what? Indeed, so what? What does this mean for us? The world's becoming more virtual. Technology is becoming more immersive. These are wonderfully engaging, and I would certainly never expose my children to something that I thought was dangerous. But there is some ground to be nervous about these things. Those guys just have no sense of politeness. So loud. So what does this mean? I'm conscious of this question, especially with my children, watching my children interact daily with devices. And by interact, I mean, it's terrifying that my 3-year-old can control, with his voice only, the temperature in our house, lights in our house, doors, locks on our doors. If he knew how, he could order thousands of dollars in stuff on Amazon and have it shipped. I don't know if there's a boy that ordered, I think it was $4,000 in popsicles the other day. He hacked his mother's account. You don't even need to hack our account. If you're in our house, you just tell our smart device that you want something. And we see these connections growing, and it's effortless for my children. My 3-year-old has learned how to speak in large part simply by talking to a smart device. It couldn't understand him. He didn't register because his syntax, his grammar, his vocabulary just wasn't there. So he had to work at it to control the world around him. He had to work to learn how to speak. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating to watch. So it helped him. But on the other hand, he's growing up now trusting these devices. what's the temperature outside, what time is it, setting an alarm to do this or setting an alarm to do that, what does this mean, how many months in a year, so on and so on. This device has simply become a part of his life, part of his family. Will it ever turn on him? And I don't mean, will it ever try to kill him? I mean, will the company that owns that subtly try to manipulate the context for money, for profit, to control his life in some way, for money or for profit? We've all thought about these things before, but now that our children, you and I, but our children are so intertwined with the digital, I'm forced to revisit this on a daily basis. When my children are using a smart device, they're using a device that has a hidden agenda, something that they're not cognizant of yet. You and I are, we're a little bit older, we understand capitalism and how it works. It has a belief system built into it that, as an example, is willing to record every conversation and store it on a server, which of course demolishes privacy rights of any kind. Even though you can delete this thing, if you want to use the device, you have to use this voice recording system. That may, in the end, data be sold. Why wouldn't it be? It may in the end be in Amazon's best interest to use this to do a more aggressive marketing. Maybe future employers want to do a little bit of research, so Amazon gives them access to this information, conversations that you're having in the privacy of your home, to help them make informed. You get the idea. I don't think Amazon's going to do that. I'm fairly sure its privacy rules prevent that, but in the name of profit, far worse has been done. So what is the argument so far? The argument so far is that technology is more than just physical stuff. We need an interdisciplinary perspective to understand it. That just the basic history of technology is one of increasing virtuality and an explosion of capitalist interests through that, which is hardly surprising. But that all of these things have consequences for our values and our assumptions about what technology is based on. Knowing where we've been will help us know where we might be going. From Lode Runner to Subnautica, from one laptop generation to another laptop generation, it's clear that we're becoming more virtual. It's clear that the capitalist assumptions are built into these devices, and openly so, but these have consequences for privacy rights. And as strange as it will sound, consequences for human freedom. So how digital are you? Many people, as it turns out, have cyber addictions, internet addictions. And when I was researching this conversation, I was surprised to find just how many websites there are and how widespread the concern seems to be, from the Canadian Mental Health Association and on, because I'm in Canada. It's really quite surprising how big of an issue this has become and how quickly. And I raised this issue because I don't think in a Lode Runner generation we would have this level of internet addiction. But the more virtual technology becomes, the more virtual our lives become, the more enticing it is, the more it pulls us in, and why not? It's fascinating to see these new worlds. You may have heard the term digital native. This is a catchphrase that's commonly used in these kinds of conversations. I'm not a big fan of the word digital native for different reasons. There are those who debate whether there even is such a thing as a digital native. I'm a few years away from being designated a digital native based on my age. Are you a digital native? A digital native is someone who is fluent and been born into screens, technology, newer technologies facilitated by screens. You have no problem being online one moment and living in the real world the next. These two don't really bother you. The argument has been made that if you're a digital native, you have a new language that in many ways is incommensurate or doesn't work with previous languages because you think in a different way. Being fluid in these worlds has equipped you to see differently, to think differently, to feel differently. In 2001, Mark Prensky popularized the term that had been floating around, digital native. That was 2001, so it was a while ago. And what has happened subsequently, not always, but often, is that people use this term to demarcate a two worlds theory. There's sort of an us and a them, the old generation and the new generation. The new generation that's digital, using screens all of the time, social media all of the time, new language, new ways of seeing the world, okay. But is that true? And is that old new distinction still useful 20-some years later? Is it really new anymore? I mean, sure, when you compare Lode Runner Subnautica, it certainly feels new, but the change, the shift has been far more gradual, and it's not clear that using the phrase digital native helps us understand generations all that better. It might actually hold us back in a few ways. How might the phrasing or the terminology digital native hold us back? Well, consider, I've seen this in education. In education, the assumption has been that with the digital native, whoever this person might be, the digital native needs a new form of education that's digitized in some way. That's their language, that's their world. And if we don't digitize education, so textbooks online or something like that, or more entertainment media saturation in our courses, then we're failing them fundamentally. They won't learn, they won't understand. There's human 1.0, then human 2.0, and we need to have a new world that addresses human 2.0. Is that true? Is that actually happening? Notice the displacement theory at work here. The assumption is that what's new has rejected the old, that what's new has no real connection with the old. And that's clearly not the case. In fact, I think you, if you're one of my students, or we in general, live a world in which we synthesize the old and the new all of the time fluently. And the belief that we need to compartmentalize ourselves as the digital native generation or not doesn't seem entirely helpful. Let's answer the question, what is digital? I warned you I was going to be general about this, so let's hypothesize about some of the key themes or traits that we're hearing about time and again. These may not be accurate of your experiences, but see what you think. I want to call this one squirrel syndrome and the myth of multitasking. There are a lot of numbers floating around regarding how much time scholars think people spend online. I've heard anywhere between 6 and 11 hours per day. I suspect that's changing. Obviously, on a day-to-day basis, that changes. In 2017, they were averaging 3.3 hours per day on the phone. So mobile phone usage was 3.3 hours. So whether that's online or dialogue, it's not always clear. Long story short, we're spending a lot of time online. A lot of time online while trying to do other things, multitasking. The question becomes, is multitasking possible? And is this engagement with the virtual helping the tasks we need to do in the physical, in the other real world? I encourage you to look into the studies on this. Long story short, it turns out we're terrible at multitasking. The more we devote ourselves to different tasks, the more we diminish our ability to do those tasks well. If you're doing a task that doesn't require to be done well, that you can be sloppy at, then yes, you can multitask and the results won't be terribly good, like driving while talking and trying to text or something else. If you're okay driving poorly and killing people, then it doesn't matter if you do it well. But multitasking well, as it turns out, is terribly difficult. There was a study out of the University of Utah that said roughly 2% of us can multitask decently, fairly well. But the trick is, the linchpin in this is, the vast majority of us think we can do it well. We think we can do it well, but under any kind of testing circumstances, we don't. This is an interesting gap in which we think we're able to do something which we demonstrably cannot do. And so, when we personally try to answer the question, is my multitasking and engagement with the virtual detracting from my ability to do things well in the real? We won't be able to answer that particularly well because we think we can multitask well, when we can't. By squirrel syndrome, I mean the always-on syndrome. There aren't any squirrels out right now. They're everywhere through the forest, but they're constantly jittering about, kind of like they've had way too much caffeine. Is that your lifestyle with the digital? You're always on task, waiting for an email, listening for that text chime, waiting for some kind. I'm constantly trying to turn off these updates on my phone. They're so distracting. Because that feeds into that multitasking where we're attentive. Our attention is constantly moving here, there, and everywhere. But notice that with a squirrel, they're basically doing one thing. They're looking for food. So yes, they're always on, they're always active, but they're focused on one thing. The virtual distracts, detracts, makes it far more difficult to focus. And when you lose your focus, do you lose your freedom? Do you lose your thought life? Do you lose your independence? Do you lose your ability to be a critical thinker? I can't answer those, but for me the answer is yes. So number one, the squirrel syndrome in multitasking points to this dangerous possibility of being unself-aware and engaging in practices that divide our loyalties to tasks that we need to attend to and that may ultimately interfere with our own well-being. The second point worth considering is the flight from boredom. Soren Kierkegaard famously argues that boredom is the root of all evil. Boredom is the root of evil. What could that mean? The flight from boredom. Boredom is the great enemy, and for many of us, we engage in the virtual, no matter how superficial and trite and no matter how silly, simply to escape the monotony of silence. We're afraid of the silence, maybe? I don't know. But is our experience of the digital today, the divine, largely characterized as this flight from boredom? And if it is it a flight from boredom to quality of life, or is it simply an escape? And if that's true, is that sustainable and healthy? Again, I can't answer these, but it's worth thinking about. Is our experience of the digital divine today an escape from boredom? A third point to consider is that thinking about thinking has changed. How we view our own mental thought life is being conditioned by the digital. Consider for a moment that since primary school now, a new emphasis on STEM research, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, has taken dominance, business too, taken over. And these are all good, and I enjoy these. I spend a lot of time thinking about these. But there's more to being a human being than STEM research, and I'm thinking now of things like the ability to be critical thinkers, to engage in conversation about big open-ended questions, and to conceive of knowledge not as just something that you put on the web, you see and it's true, but something you see on the web and then you have the ability to skillfully question and interrogate it and to look through the logical issues that may be there. That is a huge difference now. One speaks to kind of a rote learning, the other to a critical engagement with the world. So the question here is our experience of the virtual, if it's a flight from boredom, dulling our critical ability to freely think? Following on point number 2 about boredom, and point number 3 regarding how we think in our thought life, is number 4, very much connected, which is the belief that we can think in an atmosphere flooded with noise. That we don't need silence, that in our flight from boredom, we're constantly consuming digital media, and that in that huge consumer appetite, we still have a space for deliberative thought. I don't know about you, but some music is okay in the background. A little bit of visual eye candy is okay in the foreground. But for me to really be thinking about an issue and reflecting on something, my brain simply can't compute all of that with a million different distractions. I can't be clicking on Facebook. I can't be looking on Twitter. I can't be looking up something on YouTube. It just doesn't work that way, which also goes back to the myth of multitasking. See how these are all kind of working together in a new digital era? We have these assumptions that are very much challenging our quality of life. But wait, you may say. You're being too hard. We're expected to be multitaskers in our jobs. We're expected to multitask. We can't go into a vocational atmosphere and say, well, I'm going to do one thing at a time. Our bosses will kick us out. And you're right. I'm facing new pressures every day to do multiple tasks at once and not to do them particularly well. In other words, in the world we live in, it's not quality over quantity. It's quantity, it's volume. If the coffee isn't made particularly right and it's the wrong thing, that's okay. If one out of every 10 customers that goes through the drive-thru gets the wrong coffee, that's just part of it. We gotta go. These things feed into one another. And maybe like YouTube videos, some of these things are not high quality because they're pushed out to get hits, they're pushed out to get views, to get quality. Substance. Maybe we need to rethink our relationship with the digital and just generally our habits. Here's a big one. FOMO, the fear of missing out. You may have heard that terminology before. Have you experienced that before? Do you feel like you're constantly missing something important, and that if you don't check any account, some virtual account, whatever that may be, that your friends may be doing something that you're missing out on, that especially when you find out there was something you did miss out on, well, how does that make you feel? It seems counterintuitive, but the whole world that's networked now is making people feel more and more like they're not networked enough. We're able to communicate more than ever before, but with that comes the fear that we're not communicating enough, that we're always being left out. There are many reports of people feeling lonely, feeling isolated, sleeplessness, tired. They're feeling tired because they don't know if something's happening that they should know about. And I tried to brainstorm this. Personally, it didn't feel like this was really relevant to me. And then I realized that every day I go to see what's going on in the news. Every day I go to see what's going on, even though I can't control what's happening out there. It's not immediately relevant to my own life. But I have this feeling that I need to know what's going on in the world. And if I don't know, then I feel out of control in a way. In my own way, then, maybe I have a fear of missing out. The fear of missing out is ironic as it is sad. It's ironic because people leave the physical world where they could be pre-COVID, visit people, be with friends for the virtual so they can connect more, and when they get to the virtual, they feel less connected than ever. It's interesting to watch the popular consensus regarding something like Facebook and how many friends do you have? I remember people boasting about having all kinds of friends on Facebook, and then there's sort of a countercultural response to that saying, yes, but if you have 500 friends on Facebook, do you really have friends on Facebook? And then it became, well, I have very few friends because I'm very selective, and that was an indication of having quality relationships. It's interesting that we gauge our lives and our quality of friendships based on either how many or how few we have, and how few we have may actually be a sign of quality. It's a weird world. Another major theme is fear and mistrust. We live in a world where we can't trust anybody online. Even someone we know, we're not really sure it's even them sometimes, so we need to be careful. Whether it's Russian spy bots during the 2016 presidential election, or hackers shutting down gas lines, or any untold number of things. I went on a Roots website through my Facebook account once to buy a sweater. Thought it was a good idea. Turned out it wasn't even a real Roots. It really looked like a Roots retailer. And they sent me some knockoff shoes from China that, when I tried to track it down, of course, went nowhere. So even retail now, you're not sure what you're buying when you're buying things. That's the world we live in. Predators, pedophiles, criminals. The virtual world and trust do not go hand in hand. That is a major issue. And that has consequences for the world democracy. That has consequences for how we think about medicine. That has consequences for how we think about vaccines and COVID, when there are so many people out there spreading demonstrably false information that any doctor or scientist could easily refute. But hundreds of thousands or millions of people will believe the crackpots and not the doctors, not those who are educated in the topic, because it suits their worldview, it suits what they believe, and they simply trust them. Expertise now is being called into question in a strange new virtual world. And the last point, are we living in post-truth, post-authority echo chambers? Is the digital becoming more and more simply an empty chatterbox of opinion without the need or the feeling of a need for justification? My children have opinions on all kinds of things, from SpongeBob SquarePants popsicles, whether they're good or not, to whatever else. But they're being told from a very early age that it's one thing to have an opinion, it's quite another to have reasons for it, justification for it. And the virtual realm, it seems, has become a realm in which justification, merit, warrant, evidence, reasons, well, they just don't seem to matter. What matters often are thumbs up, are clicks. And if you get a lot of attention, you get a lot of voices that agree with you, well, then you have merit, then you have warrant. But that's not how the real world works. And so we see a major problem arising. And it's a problem that feeds into this issue of trust. Trusting people's opinion without having a warrant or merit or justification behind it is scary, is frightening. And we shouldn't. But we're being told to, we're being expected to trust people at face value because they have a lot of hits or thumbs up. And it simply doesn't make any sense. Now, I've painted a fairly negative picture of the digital, and I think that's largely accurate, but there are a lot of positive and wonderful things too, including increased healthcare, the ability to have your digital footprints. If I was sick right now and I needed to be taken by a helicopter to the closest hospital, they would be able to get my medical information instantaneously, and they would know if I had any lingering diseases or issues that could help me. So the digital is good in so many ways, and yet many of us are feeling powerless. We're feeling powerless because we have no choice. Time and again, I've heard students complain that they don't like Facebook, but they feel like they're missing out. They feel like that's where the world is, so they have to be online. So is this then maybe one of the hallmarks of the digital experience, the feeling of being forced to be digital, whether you want to or not? We can't pick and choose the pieces that we want. It's just one grand digital world, and here we are. Of course, that too impacts our sense of freedom. What should we do? We learn to be critical thinkers, we learn to be critical consumers and virtual participants. I'm not disengaging from the virtual anytime soon. I'm excited about the latest rendition of Subnautica to come out to play with my boys. I want to be virtual. but I want a healthier, happier, safer experience for my children, and I believe we can do it. At this point, we've talked about a number of hypotheticals with religion. We've talked about a number of hypotheticals with digital technology, the virtual life, what that might mean. And moving forward, we're going to combine both interests. What does it mean when themes like trust and a fear of missing out and a loss of authority and a loss of truth, what do these things mean when combined with religion, which traditionally has been the source of you can trust us, community building, we have a source of truth and agreed upon truth and established truth. Responsibility. One of the major reasons that people have been religious in society is that it upholds standards of morals and laws for culture so that people don't get hurt. But the virtual, well, that's a whole different set of rules. So we're going to discuss all of these things going forward.